Main job of a journalist is to report the news. Of course, not all events are newsworthy. For instance, I don't recall anyone writing a story about the time I bought a pair of jeans at JCPenney. So here's a list of 7 news elements. Proximity. Did the story occur close to home? Would it interest someone in Cape Girardeau what's going on in Moldova, for instance? Timeliness. Did the story happen recently? Am I going to be interested about something that took place 2 years ago and has nothing to do with today's events? Conflict. Are there opposing viewpoints? Anytime there's conflict involved, the media is interested about it. Prominence. Is someone important involved? Did this happen to Kate or did this happen to J Lo? Uniqueness. Is this something we've never heard? Currency. Is this a hot topic? Is everyone talking about COVID-19, for instance? Then that's newsworthy. Impact. How many people are affected by what's going on right now? Neutrality is a very important value in journalism. Journalists should be unbiased. We should not care about what they think or what they believe. A journalist is supposed to report the facts and present them. Emotional detachment brings credibility to the news. So, anytime a reporter covers a story, they should make sure they are not biased towards a source or towards the topic or towards the conclusion of that story. Now, to make sure a reporter avoids bias, the best way to go through is to use the inverted pyramid, which is a structure based on facts and not opinions. So, balance is a very important aspect because you have to present all viewpoints on a story, even those you disagree with or those you don't think are reliable. Accuracy, make sure facts are correct. Check the facts all the time. Don't take an expert's opinion as being a fact. You have to check the facts all the time. There's a joke that runs in the journalism world, and they say, if your mother tells you she loves you, don't believe it. Fact check it. Simplicity. Use short sentences with words that avoid bias. And finally, write in third person point of view because this is more objective and less personal. Now, there's a difference between print and broadcast journalism. Some people prefer to get their news from newspapers, while others prefer to get their news from TV. Now, what's the difference between the two of them? So, obviously, television is a visual medium and it relies on good images. Um, Television is impacted by imagery. So people who are visual learners, they would probably prefer watching TV and getting their news from a broadcast channel. Also, when it comes to television, there's a great emphasis on personality. So how often you see people that have charisma, they're really nice, and just people start watching TV because of the personality of a host and not necessarily because of the show that they're leading. Stories are more condensed. So, if you are able to develop and contextualize a story in newspapers, you are not so able to do that in broadcast. And finally, newspapers can offer more in depth analysis, while TV stories focus on few highlights. For instance, a television news story is about 30 seconds in length. Now, that's equivalent to about 7 lines of text. Broadcast journalists are expected to be personable. They are seen as more credible. However, remember that context that a print story can bring to the scene. Now, broadcast tactics are criticized by print media, and they have several reasons why they do that. One of these reasons is action news. News consultants suggested that viewers wanted more exciting news broadcasts. And that's the famous quote that it's widely used in the broadcast media. If it bleeds, it leads. Anytime there's blood or conflict involved, then the media is right there because people naturally want to find out about people's conflicts. and want to get more of that story. Sound bites, short interview pieces used in TV news. Today, the average length of a sound bite is 8 seconds, which is very short. And finally, happy talk, which it refers to the banter that goes on between anchors during the broadcast. And that's a point that we've already touched on. You get to be attached by the host and not by the show itself, just because you get to know the host so well and they are so personable and just always smiling and always having a good mood and just being really nice. Now let's talk a little bit about ethics. So Stephen Glass was a really successful reporter, but he was fired because his stories weren't true. And what he did in his stories is that he fabricated a lot of the facts. So he fabricated information and presented it as being factual when it was actually things that he came up with. And this is something that's extremely unethical. It can ruin your reputation, it can ruin a publication's reputation, and it can hurt your entire life. Now, if we talk about the code of ethics, journalists ought to follow a code of ethics. They should know why they do things that they do and why they don't things that they don't. So, some of the ethical guidelines that reporters follow are: seek the truth and report it. Fairness and honesty are at the heart of everything. So be true to your facts, be true to your sources, and make sure your interest is always to present the truth, even if that truth is going to hurt a politician or it's going to uncover something that is wrong. Minimize harm. However, when you're seeking for the truth and reporting it, your ultimate interest should be to minimize harm. Journalists should treat their sources and subjects with respect. If reporting the truth about one of your sources could endanger them, then it's probably not worth telling the truth, because at the end of the day, you have to make sure no one's going to get hurt. And the golden rule that goes into this principle is: do unto others what you want others to do unto you. So if you would be involved in a car wreck, you wouldn't like the photographers or reporters to take pictures of you bleeding and having your feet broken, or um, your your whole body looking really bad. You wouldn't like your family to find out about that from a reporter either. So make sure you're considerate about the way you present the facts. Act independently. And this refers to journalists avoiding all conflicts of interest. Do not accept any gifts and special treatment from anyone. Would it be politician? It could even be your own boss. It could be a friend. You should always stay true to your profession and stay true to the ethical code that you're following. And finally, be accountable. Journalists should encourage criticism of news stories and admit mistakes when they're made. Don't be embarrassed if you've made a mistake. We all make mistakes. I remember a time when I went to a press conference and I asked the most dummiest question I could have. And that's because I didn't do my research. I asked a question that my editor told me to ask, and that was wrong for me to do. Why? Because I trusted his judgment and I did not check the facts. So, this is something that I've learned from, and I'm not embarrassed of it. It's actually a lesson that I'm carrying with me, and it's an example I always share with my students to make sure they learn from others' mistakes. Now, there are some ethical dilemmas because reporters wonder, well, what should I do in a situation when it's important to report the truth, to report the facts, but if I do, someone's going to get hurt. So these are dilemmas that they struggle with all the time. Now, you should not use deception. You should not pretend that you are a policeman wanting to find out the truth about bribing, for instance, and you dress as a policeman, you walk in, and you introduce yourself as a policeman wanting to find out the truth. Technically, this is unethical, and deceptive practices should never be used to get a story. Now, some journalists believe in absolutist ethics, and Absolutist ethics involves that you should never do something that's wrong, even if you have a good intention. For instance, stealing is wrong. You should never steal. You should not steal even when your family is dying of hunger, and you stealing will actually save their life. So, absolutist ethics thinks that's wrong. Now, other people believe in situational ethics and they look at the greater good that was served. So, for situational ethics, it's okay to steal if that's going to save your family from hunger. Fabrication. Um, Journalists have used fabrication quite a lot when they wanted to have a more compelling story. And that's wrong to do, so that's unethical. Invasion of privacy, that's another dilemma. When protecting a person's right to privacy versus the public's right to know important information. And finally, rush to judgment. That's done quite a lot in broadcast, especially when reporters want to release information that hasn't been confirmed yet and they want to just have that breaking news on the evening show and make sure they're first to report something.